Amsterdam, the Amsterdam Torture Museum. This is the first of 5 episodes for part 1. Part 2 will also have 5 episodes. They're about 15 minutes each. And what we're going to explore are the issues surrounding torture and human rights. And some of this is drawn from a book that I wrote a couple years ago called Escape to Prison. You can find described on my website, ProfessorMichaelWelch.com. And in the book, I explore the phenomenon of penal tourism, of the activity of tourists who enter these exhibits. And one of the things that I write about is safe contact. Now that's a bit of a phenomenological concept, which is that people want to engage in something that appears to be dangerous without being harmed. Safe contact. And along the way, we're going to talk about cultural sociology and semiotics, the study of signs and communication. The museum effect, as we're going to see once we enter the torture museum, is a combination of looking at objects and images within the confines of a particular space. So let's see if we can enter this torture museum. As you can see, the audience is intended to be international. You can see all these different languages explaining the purpose of the medieval exhibit. But for our purposes, let us hone in on the English language, since I think I'm probably better at that than some of these others that might be listed. The European pillory in the marketplace, the infamous marks of punishment, were part and parcel of everyday life. The procedure of the Inquisition, shameful and corporal punishments, persecution of heretics and witches. Now, let me make a brief sociological comment there, that the city is a site for drama. Cities is where the action is. In European cities in medieval times was no exception. We'll come back to that. The procedures of the Inquisition. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about moral and religious forces that are contoured into a larger apparatus of social control. More about that later. Torture instruments from all parts of Europe. Now, what we're going to see are actual instruments of torture. Authenticity adds to the overall museum effect, adds to the notion of safe contact, since these are the actual instruments. Numerous illustrative engravings. Now, we're going to see a lot of handmade drawings that capture moments of torture. And of course, we have these historical explanations in 6 languages. Enough of that. Let's pop ahead to this one here. Now we're still on the outside the museum. We're near the ticket booth. But what the curators are trying to do is draw tourists into this exhibit. So we're going to pay attention to how curators actually put on their own performance. These are storytelling institutions. There's a lot of performance involved. And here they put on display this instrument. And it appears that an individual might be seated on this particular panel. And what you don't see is that there's actually wheels attached at the bottom. And this is known as the cloak of shame. Let me see if we can read some of this text. This is very important to studying the history of torture. The wooden cloak of shame was an especially disgraceful punishment for adulterous women. Once again, religious and moral forces figure prominently, covered with snakes and lizards and other impure vermin. Holding a candle as a token of remorse and accompanied with a roll of drums. So this would be a procession through the European city. A ritual of punishment. Again, we're drawing on the vocabulary of sociology of culture. The women were driven around town. Many miscreants wear some sort of shameful outfit. It was one of the most customary punishments. Particularly commoners, who could not be expected to pay high fines. So if you could buy your way out of it, you wouldn't be put in this public spectacle. In a time without mass media, those were the symbolic means the government employed to make known good morals. Symbolic means, semiotics. Now we're at the ticket booth, and what the curators are trying to do is create an aura, to create some atmosphere, some anticipation. So you see this interior of the ticket booth that it resembles a medieval castle. Now this is a bit hokey. However, once we get inside the exhibit, you're going to see items that were actually salvaged from history and preserved by historians and put on display. And this is foreshadowing. There's a photograph in the entrance area. It gives us an idea of some of the things we're going to witness. This is building anticipation. And with the cursor, I'm going to point to a few things. You're going to see a hoist with a pulley and so on and so forth. So you can use your imagination in anticipation of what that might be used for. It will be explained later, and that's why I use the term foreshadowing. It's giving us information in advance that will then blend together with more information that will explain the context. You see these chunks of cement? Foreshadowing. We're going to see more of how that is significant once we enter the museum. And a brochure. Pick up the brochure. Ask yourself, your friends, your family, is this something we really want to do? There's a bit of a dialogue. Is this something we really want to experience while we're in Amsterdam? You know, we could go to the Rijksmuseum, we could go to the Van Gogh Museum. There's a lot of things to do. Do we want to spend our vacation entering an exhibit? So there's a bit of a discussion. As you can see, there's the torture chair. Scare the hell out of you. That's exactly what the Inquisitors had in mind. And there's the address, website, so on and so forth, giving us a little bit more detail of what to expect. You see the guillotine. Learn the painful truth. Okay, so they're using a lot of inside language that curators use in what we call museum studies. So with that, we have a brief introduction. Let us take the plunge and begin with the exhibit. Now, the sociology of culture is rife with vocabulary that points to certain phenomena. Two binaries that we're going to talk a lot about in this episode and others is the binaries of sacred and profane. That which is holy and sacred, and that which is profane and polluted. Pollution is danger, it is evil. And pollution is oftentimes used to punish those who breach the sacred line that protects the sacred. And this is a guy who was unfortunately confined to a pillory. This is a barrel, and it's ornate. You can see some of the drawings, the illustrations, that try to tell some story, some narrative, try to add a little bit of intrigue as to what this thing is. But what you don't see is that the interior of this barrel is filled with pollution. Urine, feces, dirty water, perhaps a dead rat or two. And this is pollution. And this is used to punish someone who has violated the local norms. Stocks and pillories, wooden frames that put the offender on display for public humiliation. The spectacle is a theatrical vehicle by which torture is exhibited as well as enhanced. So you can see the person's chin, the head be protruding through this center, and then the hands, and then placed on display. And this is one of the engravings that we were told about. And this engraving shows the victim put on public display. And you see a lot of activity here. And this is reminding us that the European town square was a site of drama, of a lot of action. And punishment was part of the cityscape. Torture. Now we have some text that will place these developments in its historical context. A quote from Erasmus about the gallows are everywhere. Numerous are the executioners, about the air of the gallows, this foul, disgusting air, the mere mouthing of the word. Pestilent revolts me. The hangmen are no fellows to converse with. Pestilent air around the gallows. Screams of agony on the rack. Whooping crowds gathered around the pillory. It seems to be sheer barbarous abuses from dark Middle Ages. Fortunately, we are living in modern civilization now. We think. Now, let's take that statement and step back and recognize that what the curators are introducing is a sense of skepticism. Do we really live in a civilized society as we speak? However, historic reality is less comforting. This exhibit shows reality as it existed less than 2 centuries ago. By setting gruesome examples, public authorities demonstrated their right to do as they please with the lives and bodies of their subjects. If the grotesque diversity of instruments of torture still invokes feelings of horror, it is no more than the designer's intended effect. Now, an operative word I want to point to right here, the bodies of their subjects. In this episode and episodes to follow, we are going to engage in some theoretical conversation. And the body figures prominently in our understanding of torture as well as our appreciation of human rights. And it is with that that I'm going to pause, go back to my kitchen, prepare a nice cup of coffee, have a brief rest, and then come back and talk more about torture and human rights in the context of the Amsterdam Torture Museum.